James Harrison stood at the observation deck of Mining Station Delta 9, watching the strange luminescence that had been appearing in the asteroid belt for the past 3 weeks. As the station's environmental systems engineer, he should have been more concerned with the failing oxygen recyclers on Level 3, but something about those lights kept drawing his attention. They moved with purpose, weaving between the asteroids with a grace that suggested intelligence rather than natural phenomenon. "Harrison, you're needed in engineering." The voice of Director Walsh crackled through his comm unit, interrupting his observations. "The pressure readings are off the charts again." James sighed, taking one last look at the mysterious lights before heading to the elevator. Delta 9 had been having strange equipment malfunctions ever since the lights first appeared: pressure fluctuations, communication distortions, and unexplained power drains. Most of the crew blamed it on solar flare activity, but James wasn't convinced. The engineering deck was chaos when he arrived. Warning lights flashed across every console, and the maintenance crew rushed between stations with barely contained panic. Director Walsh's usually perfectly styled gray hair was disheveled, her dark skin shining with sweat as she worked furiously at the main control panel. "We're looking at complete systems failure in under an hour if we can't stabilize these pressure differentials," she announced as James approached. "Nothing we do seems to have any effect." James pulled up the diagnostic screens, his eyes widening at the readings. The pressure wasn't just fluctuating, it was increasing systematically, as if something was deliberately manipulating the station's environmental controls. As he studied the pattern, a crazy theory began forming in his mind. "Director," he said slowly, "what if these aren't malfunctions? What if someone's trying to communicate?" Walsh looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "Communicate? Through pressure changes?" "Think about it," James continued, pulling up the data from the past 3 weeks. "The patterns are too regular to be random failures. And look at this. They're increasing in complexity, like someone learning a new language through trial and error." Before Walsh could respond, every screen in engineering suddenly went dark. When they flickered back to life, they displayed the same message: mathematical sequences, but arranged in a pattern James had never seen before. As they watched, the sequences began transforming, morphing into recognizable Earth numerals and then into words. "We apologize for the pressure adjustments. We needed to ensure compatibility before direct contact." The observation deck's emergency alert began blaring. James and Walsh rushed to the nearest viewport, joining the growing crowd of stunned crew members. Outside, the mysterious lights they'd been seeing in the asteroid belt had converged around the station. As they watched, the lights coalesced into massive, translucent vessels filled with what appeared to be water. Inside these aquatic ships, they could see them, the Aquilans. They were beautiful and alien, bioluminescent beings that seemed to be made of living crystal and flowing water, their bodies pulsing with patterns of light that somehow conveyed both intelligence and emotion. Their ships held not air but pressurized water, explaining the pressure fluctuations that had been plaguing the station. They hadn't been malfunctions at all, they had been attempts at matching environments for first contact. "They've been studying us," James realized aloud. "Learning our systems, our mathematics, our language. They needed to understand our technology before they could safely approach." A new message appeared on the screens: "We are the Aquilans. We have watched your mining operations with great interest. Your ability to adapt to the vacuum of space, to survive in an environment so different from your origin, has fascinated us. We wish to learn from you." Director Walsh straightened her uniform, her training kicking in despite her obvious shock. "Mr. Harrison, it seems your expertise with environmental systems is about to become even more valuable. We need to figure out how to safely interface with their vessels without compromising either of our life support requirements." James was already running calculations in his head. The engineering challenge was immense, finding a way to create a secure connection between an air-breathing environment and a highly pressurized aquatic one, with 2 completely different atmospheric requirements. But as he looked at the elegant ships of the Aquilans, he felt a surge of excitement. This was why humanity had come to the stars, not just to mine resources, but to discover new life and find ways to bridge the seemingly impossible gaps between species. "We'll need to design an entirely new type of airlock," he said, his mind racing with possibilities. "Something that can handle the pressure differential while maintaining both environments. It's never been done before, but..." He trailed off as he noticed new patterns of light flowing across the Aquilan vessels, somehow conveying a sense of approval and anticipation. The next message that appeared on their screens would change the course of human history: "We have chosen well. Your species sees obstacles as opportunities for innovation. This is why we came to you first. There are others among the stars who would benefit from this wisdom." As the crew of Delta 9 scrambled to prepare for humanity's first official contact with an alien species, James couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the greatest discoveries came not from finding what you were looking for, but from being willing to see the patterns in what others dismissed as simple malfunctions. The makeshift diplomatic chamber aboard Delta 9 was a study in stark contrasts. On one side, a hastily constructed transparent tank filled with pressurized water housed the Aquilan delegation. On the other, human officials sat in standard atmospheric conditions, separated by layers of reinforced plastics and composite materials. James Harrison stood near the barrier, monitoring the environmental controls with unwavering attention. The past week had been a blur of activity. Engineers had worked around the clock to modify a cargo bay into this meeting space, while linguists and xenobiologists struggled to improve their understanding of Aquilan communication. The aliens' primary method of expression, patterns of bioluminescence combined with precise pressure waves, had proven fascinating but challenging to interpret. First Officer Raina Patel, who had taken charge of diplomatic relations, was in the middle of discussing potential technological exchanges when James noticed something concerning on his monitors. The pressure in the Aquilan chamber was fluctuating beyond normal parameters. "There's something wrong with their environment," James muttered, drawing closer to his readings. The Aquilans must have sensed it too. Their typically smooth color patterns had become erratic, displaying what he had learned to recognize as signs of distress. Before he could voice his concerns, a deep groan echoed through the chamber. Hairline cracks appeared along the seams of the Aquilan tank, spreading like spider webs across the transparent barrier. "Everyone out!" James shouted, but it was too late. With a deafening crack, the barrier shattered. The next few moments were chaos. Pressurized water exploded into the human section of the chamber. Emergency bulkheads began to close, but the force of the water had damaged their mechanisms. The Aquilans, suddenly exposed to an environment that could kill them, writhed in obvious distress. James fought against the rushing water, making his way to the environmental control panel. He knew he had seconds to act before both species faced catastrophic consequences. The Aquilans needed their pressurized water environment to survive, but that same environment would drown the humans trapped in the chamber. Through the chaos, he saw First Officer Patel struggling to help one of the Aquilans who had been thrust against a wall by the water's force. The alien's crystalline body was beginning to dull, its bioluminescence fading, a sign of severe physiological stress. Making a split-second decision, James activated the emergency atmospheric reconfiguration system, a failsafe meant for chemical contamination events. But instead of purging the atmosphere, he modified the commands, using the system to create a pressure gradient that would slow the water's flow while maintaining a survivable environment for both species. "Raina," he called out. "Get everyone to the high ground. The gradient should give us about 10 minutes before the system fails completely." As the humans scrambled to higher levels of the chamber, James noticed something extraordinary. The Aquilans, rather than trying to return to their damaged tank, were using their natural ability to manipulate pressure to help contain the spreading water. They created invisible barriers of compressed liquid, directing the flow away from the humans while maintaining enough pressure around themselves to survive. Working together, humans and Aquilans managed to seal off the worst of the breaches. Emergency response teams arrived with portable containment fields, stabilizing the situation before either species suffered casualties. But the incident had revealed both the fragility and the potential of their attempted cooperation. Hours later, in the emergency meeting that followed, James sat with his head in his hands, reviewing the sensor data from the accident. Something wasn't adding up. The barrier's failure hadn't been caused by simple material stress. There was evidence of deliberate sabotage. The integrity field was specifically targeted, he explained to Director Walsh and the senior staff. Someone wanted this meeting to fail. The Aquilan representative, communicating through their newly refined translation system, pulsed with colors that indicated agreement. We detected anomalous energy signatures before the breach. Someone possesses technology beyond your current capabilities. But why? Reyna asked, still wrapped in a thermal blanket. Who would want to prevent our species from working together? The answer came from the most senior Aquilan, its crystalline form emanating patterns that the translators interpreted with a tone of grave concern. There are forces in this galaxy that fear cooperation between species. They prefer isolation, believing it maintains order. What they fail to understand is that isolation breeds stagnation, while adversity faced together breeds innovation. Director Walsh's expression hardened. Then we need to show them they're wrong. Mr. Harrison, your quick thinking saved lives today, both human and Aquilan. But we need more than emergency measures. We need a permanent solution. James nodded, already forming ideas. The accident had shown him something crucial, the way the Aquilans had manipulated pressure fields to protect themselves and assist the humans simultaneously. If they could replicate that ability mechanically. I think, he said slowly, the solution isn't to keep our environments separate, but to find a way to make them work together. The Aquilans can create localized pressure fields naturally. If we could develop technology to do the same. The Aquilan Elder's colors shifted to a pattern indicating strong approval. This is why we chose to reveal ourselves to humans first. Where others see insurmountable differences, you see opportunities for growth. Even in crisis, you seek not just to survive, but to understand and adapt. As the meeting continued, James began sketching out preliminary designs for what would become known as the Harmonic Environmental Integration System. The sabotage attempt had failed. Instead of driving the species apart, it had shown them exactly how they needed to work together. But somewhere out in the darkness of space, those who had orchestrated the accident were watching, and they weren't finished trying to keep humanity and the Aquilans apart. The workshop aboard Delta 9 had transformed into a peculiar hybrid of terrestrial and aquatic engineering. James stood before a holographic display, manipulating the schematics of the Harmonic Environmental Integration System while an Aquilan named VRXX floated in a temporary containment field beside him, its crystalline form pulsing with patterns of concentrated thought. The primary issue, James explained to the assembled team of human and Aquilan engineers, isn't just managing the pressure differential. It's creating an interface that allows both species to interact naturally while maintaining their optimal environments. The past 2 weeks since the sabotage attempt had been intense. Security had been heightened throughout the station, but more importantly, the incident had accelerated the need for better integration between the two species. The makeshift solutions they'd been using were proving increasingly inadequate. VRXX's bioluminescent patterns shifted, and the translator converted the pressure waves into speech. We have observed that human innovation often comes from combining existing concepts in unexpected ways. Perhaps we should examine this problem from a different perspective. James watched as VRXX manipulated its own containment field, creating complex patterns of pressure that reminded him of something he'd seen before. Wait, he said, excitement building in his voice. That's it. We're thinking too linearly. We don't need to create a single environment that works for both species, we need to create an interface that maintains two distinct environments simultaneously. He quickly pulled up footage from the accident, focusing on the moment when the Aquilans had used their natural abilities to contain the water while still allowing interaction with the humans. Look at these pressure patterns. They're not static barriers, they're dynamic fields that respond to both environments simultaneously. Director Walsh, who had been silently observing, stepped forward. But we can't replicate the Aquilans' natural abilities. Our technology isn't advanced enough. We don't need to replicate it exactly, James replied, his fingers flying over the holographic controls. We just need to understand the principles behind it. VRXX, can you demonstrate that pressure manipulation again, but slower this time? As the Aquilan complied, James recorded the precise measurements of the pressure waves. Patterns began emerging, mathematical relationships that could be translated into technological applications. The solution wasn't to force either species to adapt to the other's environment, but to create a dynamic boundary that could maintain both simultaneously. We'll need to develop new materials, one of the human engineers pointed out. Nothing we currently have can handle these kinds of precise pressure differentials. Another Aquilan, whose name translated roughly as Zinare, pulsed with what the humans had learned to recognize as excitement. Perhaps we can assist with that. Our shipbuilding technology includes materials that respond to pressure variations on a molecular level. The next several days were a blur of activity. Human ingenuity combined with Aquilan knowledge produced prototypes of a new kind of environmental suit, one that didn't just protect its wearer but actively harmonized with the surrounding environment. The design incorporated crystalline structures similar to those in Aquilan biology, allowing for dynamic pressure adjustment. The first successful test came on day 19 after the accident. James stood in a sealed chamber, wearing what looked like a sleek, transparent armor made of living crystal. Across from him, VRXX floated without any containment field. The suit automatically adjusted its internal pressure and atmosphere as James moved, while creating a localized field that maintained the Aquilans' needed environment. It's working, James breathed, reaching out to touch the water-filled space around VRXX without disrupting it. The Aquilans' colors pulsed with joy as their appendages met in what could only be described as the first true handshake between their species. But the breakthrough came with an unexpected revelation. As they analyzed the data from the successful test, they discovered something that changed their understanding of the sabotage attempt. The technology they developed shared striking similarities with trace energy signatures found at the scene of the accident. These readings, James said, looking at Director Walsh with concern, whoever tried to sabotage the meeting, they already have technology like this. They didn't want to prevent us from meeting, they wanted to prevent us from developing this independently. The Aquilan elders' colors darkened to deep, serious tones. There are those among the stars who believe that technological advancement should be controlled, distributed according to their judgment. They fear what happens when species learn to innovate on their own. But why? Reyna asked. Surely advancement benefits everyone? Not those whose power comes from controlling access to advanced technology, James realized. We're not just creating a way for our species to interact, we're proving that innovation can come from cooperation rather than dependency. The elder Aquilan pulsed with approval. This is why we chose humanity. Other species wait to be given solutions. Humans, when faced with a challenge, create their own. As James looked at the prototype suit, he understood that they had built more than just a piece of technology. They had created proof that the barriers between species were only as insurmountable as they believed them to be. But he also knew that this revelation would make them an even bigger target for whoever had tried to stop them. The warning came 3 days after they successfully tested the environmental integration suits. Delta IX's long-range sensors detected multiple ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. They weren't Aquilan vessels, nor did they match any known human designs. 7 ships, Director Walsh announced to the Emergency Council. They're not responding to hails, and they're moving to surround both the station and the Aquilan vessels. James studied the tactical display, noting how the unknown ships had positioned themselves to cut off all escape routes. Next to him, the Aquilan elder's crystalline form rippled with patterns that the humans had learned to recognize as grave concern. "They are the regulators," the elder's translated voice explained. "They believe they alone should control the spread of advanced technology throughout the galaxy. We have encountered them before. And they're here to stop us from developing the integration technology independently," James finished. "But why come in force now? Why not just try sabotage again?" The answer came in the form of a system-wide transmission. A harsh, artificial voice filled the command center. "You have developed technology beyond your designated level of advancement. Surrender your research and prototypes. Compliance is mandatory. You have 1 hour to respond." Director Walsh's expression hardened. "And if we refuse? Then we will be forced to ensure compliance through direct intervention." As the transmission cut off, James noticed something odd about the sensor readings from the enemy ships. "These energy signatures, they're similar to our integration suits, but much cruder. They're using brute force to maintain their environments instead of working with natural pressure dynamics." The Aquilan elder pulsed with what could only be described as grim satisfaction. "Yes. The regulators take technology from various species and repurpose it, but they lack the innovation to truly understand or improve it. They merely copy and control." "That's it," James exclaimed, an idea forming. "Their ships must use similar principles to our integration suits. They're maintaining artificial environments for whatever species is inside. But if they don't fully understand the technology..." He turned to VRXX, who had been quietly analyzing the sensor data. "Could we use our understanding of pressure dynamics to disrupt their environmental systems without causing catastrophic failure? Not to harm them, but to force them to withdraw?" The Aquilans' colors shifted rapidly, their equivalent of intense calculation. Yes, we could create a resonance wave that would make their environmental systems highly uncomfortable without endangering lives. But we would need to get much closer to their ships. And we'd need to protect ourselves from any counterattack," Reyna added. "They're not going to sit quietly while we do this." Director Walsh looked between the humans and Aquilans. "How many of the new integration suits do we have ready?" "For fully functional prototypes," James replied. "They're not combat tested, but..." "They're about to be," Walsh decided. "Mr. Harrison, you and First Officer Patel will take 2 of the suits. 2 Aquilans in the other 2. We'll use the mining station's shuttle as cover to get you close enough." What followed was the most intense preparation period of James's life. As the deadline approached, they modified the mining shuttle to accommodate both human and Aquilan life support needs. The integration suits were loaded with the resonance wave generators they had hastily designed. 50 minutes after the ultimatum, the shuttle launched from Delta 9. James and Reyna, sealed in their crystalline suits, sat beside VRXX and another Aquilan named KL Shar. Through the shuttle's viewscreen, they could see the regulator ships looming ahead, massive, angular vessels that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Remember," James said as they approached, "we don't need to hit all their ships. If we can disrupt even 2 or 3 of their environmental systems, it should force them to withdraw rather than risk their entire fleet." The first shot from the regulator ships came just as they reached optimal range. The shuttle pilot, a veteran of asteroid mining operations, rolled the craft with practiced ease, using the debris field for cover. "Now!" Reyna called. The 4 suited figures launched from the shuttle's airlock. Using maneuvering thrusters built into their suits, they split into 2 teams, James with VRXX, Reyna with KL Shar. As they approached their targets, James could see the regulators launching their own suited figures to intercept them. But there was a crucial difference. Where the regulator suits were rigid and mechanical, the human Aquilan design moved like living crystal, adapting instantly to the pressures around them. When the regulators fired their weapons, James and VRXX's suits automatically adjusted their pressure fields to deflect the energy bolts. Initiating resonance wave, VRXX announced. James activated his own generator in sync with the Aquilans' natural abilities. Together, they created a complex pattern of pressure waves that rippled through space toward the nearest regulator ship. The effect was immediate. The massive vessel shuddered, its environmental systems struggling to compensate for the disruption. Through the ship's viewports, James could see its crew writhing in discomfort as their artificial atmosphere fluctuated unpredictably. On the other side of the formation, Reyna and KL Shar achieved similar results with their target. 2 ships down, their crews distracted, their environmental systems unreliable. The remaining regulator vessels began to pull back, unwilling to risk the same fate. But the true victory wasn't in forcing the regulators to retreat. It was in demonstrating that humanity and the Aquilans, working together, could create technology that surpassed anything the regulators had stolen and hoarded. They had proven that true innovation comes not from controlling knowledge, but from sharing it freely between species. As they returned to Delta 9, James realized that they had done more than defend themselves. They had shown the galaxy a new way forward, one where species could learn from each other rather than depend on self-appointed regulators of progress. The regulators' withdrawal wasn't just a tactical victory. It was proof that the barriers between species were meant to be bridged, not enforced. 3 months after the confrontation with the regulators, Delta 9 had transformed. What began as a simple mining station was now the hub of human-Aquilan cooperation, its corridors and chambers adapted to accommodate both species freely. James walked through these spaces in his latest version of the integration suit, marveling at how natural it felt to move between aquatic and terrestrial environments. The latest test results are promising, he told VRXX, who swam alongside him without any containment field. The integration suits had become so sophisticated that the boundary between water and air was nearly imperceptible. The commercial versions should be ready for distribution within months. But more remarkable than the technology was the change in how both species interacted. Humans and Aquilans worked side by side throughout the station, each bringing their unique perspectives to various projects. The fear and suspicion that had followed the regulators' attack had transformed into a shared sense of purpose. The regulators have been unusually quiet, Reyna observed during the daily briefing. She had been promoted to station commander after Director Walsh's retirement. Our long-range sensors haven't detected any of their ships in neighboring systems. The Aquilan elder, who had chosen to remain on Delta 9 as a permanent ambassador, pulsed with thoughtful colors. They are adapting to a new reality. Other species have begun requesting our combined technology, not just the integration suits, but the principles behind them. The regulators' monopoly on advanced technology is crumbling. James nodded, understanding the broader implications. Because we're not just giving them technology. We're teaching them how to innovate for themselves. The elder's colors shifted to a pattern of deep appreciation. This is what we saw in humanity from our first observations. You don't simply overcome obstacles, you transform them into opportunities for growth. When faced with the barrier between our environments, you didn't just build bridges, you created a way for all species to forge their own paths. The station's alert system interrupted their conversation. But unlike the warnings that had preceded the regulators' attack, this was different. A ship had appeared at the edge of the system, one that matched neither human nor Aquilan designs. We're receiving a transmission, Reyna announced. It's a request for asylum. The being that appeared on their communication screen was neither human nor Aquilan. It appeared to be a silicon-based life form, its crystalline structure reminiscent of living rock. Its translated message was simple but profound: we have watched how you overcame the division between water and air. Our people live in environments of extreme pressure and heat. We seek not your technology, but your wisdom in creating our own solutions. James looked at the Aquilan elder, whose colors had shifted to a pattern he had never seen before. "What does that pattern mean?" he asked. "It means vindication," the elder replied. "When we first discovered humanity, there were those among our people who questioned our decision to make contact. They feared that introducing ourselves to a younger species would either stunt your growth or lead to dependency. But we saw something different in how you approached problems." The elder moved closer to the screen, its colors rippling with emotion. "We saw a species that didn't just adapt to challenges, you transformed them into advantages. When you ventured into space, you didn't simply build ships to survive the vacuum, you developed technologies to make space itself your home. When you met us, you didn't just find a way to communicate, you created a means for different species to truly understand each other." And now, Reyna added, understanding dawning on her face, "Other species are learning not just from our technology, but from our example." James thought about the journey that had brought them here. From the first mysterious pressure fluctuations to the development of the integration suits, from the regulator's attack to this moment, each challenge had led not just to solutions, but to new possibilities. "We should welcome them," he said, looking at the silicon-based being on the screen. "Not just to share technology, but to learn from each other. Who knows what we might create together?" The Aquilan elder's colors pulsed with approval. "This is the true secret of why we admire humanity. Not for your technology or your adaptability alone, but for your ability to inspire others to find their own path forward. In showing us how to bridge the gap between water and air, you have taught the galaxy a far greater lesson, that the greatest innovations come not from imposing solutions, but from helping others discover their own." As they prepared to welcome their new visitors, James reflected on how far they had come. The integration suits that now allowed humans and Aquilans to work seamlessly together were more than just technological marvels, they were symbols of what could be achieved when species chose to cooperate rather than compete, to share rather than hoard, to inspire rather than control. And somewhere out in the darkness of space, other species were watching and learning, not just about the technology that bridged different environments, but about the spirit of innovation and cooperation that had made it possible. The barriers between species were falling, not because they were being broken down, but because together, they were learning to transform them into bridges. This was humanity's true gift to the galaxy, not the technology they created, but the example they set. In showing that the greatest challenges could become the greatest opportunities for growth, they had sparked a revolution that would reshape the future of all species. The legacy of Delta 9 would live on not in the integration suits or the technology they spawned, but in the countless species who would learn to find their own ways to bridge the seemingly insurmountable gaps between them.